That's where the phone is. And this is where we are, live on the link online. Yes, good day, ladies and gentlemen, all the ships at sea. We are back here in the exotic ballroom of the Radio Canada building in downtown Montreal. It's a small ballroom, as you can see, and
it's a restroom.
We're resting. And with us today, we have Carmel Kilkenny.
Hello.
And Lavon Savance.
Hello.
And Marie-Claude Simard.
Hi, everybody.
And in the back, in the control room, looking once again and wondering what the heck we're doing most of the time is Chantal Saint-Sauveur. And deep in the dark reaches of the studio room at the back, lit only by the light from the computer screen, is the man who actually knows what goes on with some of our systems here, Pierre Dutil. All right, coming up on the program today, lots of interesting stuff going on. Carmel?
Well, I'll bring you a little of what Canada's former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney said at President George H.W. Bush's funeral on Wednesday this week.
And Lavon?
And I'll have some analysis of the arrest of a top Huawei official that could shake some diplomatic relations between Canada, China, and the United States, and has much wider international repercussions.
Marie-Claude, you've got a little bit of a special for us, too.
Yes, I'll tell you about a very special library that sits on the border between the United States and Canada, in Quebec. Right. Yeah.
And speaking of Huawei, we're going to talk about that in terms of international spying concerns and a call to ban the company in several countries around the world. That's coming up on this edition of The Link Online. Well, Lavon, let's start with your story and this arrest of a top Huawei official in Canada last week. It's made headlines around the world, and she is the chief financial officer of the Chinese telecommunications giant Huawei. She's also the daughter of the Huawei founder, Ren Zhangfei. And if I understand correctly, she was arrested in Canada, but at the request of U.S. officials.
Yes, that's right. Her name is Meng Wanzhou, and she was arrested on December 1st in Vancouver as she was changing planes. The arrest was made at the request of U.S. officials. They're demanding her extradition to the United States. Now, I contacted Huawei, and they told me in a statement that she's facing some unspecified charges in the Eastern District of New York. And they said that the company has been provided very little information regarding the charges and is not aware of any wrongdoing on Ms. Meng's part. And, they said they believe that the Canadian-U.S. legal systems will ultimately reach a just conclusion. Now, there is I have to say right away that we're limited in what we can say because there's a publication ban on kind of the circumstances surrounding her arrest, and a lot of the information has been kept secret at the request of Mrs. Meng's own defense lawyer. So, and as we speak now, there is a court case that is going on in British Columbia, the British Columbia Supreme Court. It's her bail hearing, and there'll be an extradition hearing sometimes later. We don't know when yet. Now, even though she was arrested Saturday, the news of her arrest broke only on Wednesday. And on Thursday, China issued a very angry statement demanding her immediate arrest.
Release.
Her immediate release. And they said her arrest was an infringement on human rights and everything. And it also came at a very interesting, politically sensitive time because apparently, she was arrested just as President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping sat down for a dinner in Buenos Aires trying to patch up this trade war. And as you probably know, they agreed to a truce. And now there's a lot of questions internationally. So what does this mean to this truth in, this trade wars, the 60 days truth that President Xi and President Trump agreed to? And there was also a question about how much in advance the sides knew about this arrest. And so one of the questions that reporters in Canada wanted to know is we know that this arrest was done on the behalf of the U.S. Justice Department, but how much were the Canadians involved, and how much did the government know about this? So on Thursday, reporters had a chance to ask Prime Minister Justin Trudeau just about that.
I can assure everyone that we are a country of an independent judiciary, and the appropriate authorities took the decisions in this case without any political involvement or interference, as must be the case. However, this is a case, obviously, before the courts, upon which there is a publication ban, and it would be inappropriate for me to comment further.
And so, but reporters kept pushing Trudeau on this, and they wanted to know when the Prime Minister was informed about the arrest and whether he has been talking to his Chinese counterparts about this, and especially given their very strong reaction. And Trudeau added a very interesting tidbit of information.
Ça, c'est nos sandwichs.
Dans ça, il y en a environ 150 peut-être.
Poulet, jambon.
On va partir tout à l'heure.
That's definitely not Prime Minister Trudeau. So the thing that he said is that he had a few days prior notice, but he, again, insisted that there was no political interference in this case, in this decision to arrest Mrs. Meng. So. And at the same time, yesterday, the White House came out saying that apparently Trump going into this dinner with President Xi had no idea that this was going on.
Right,
I believe we have the clip.
As I said, the appropriate authorities took the decisions in this case. We were advised by them with a few days' notice that this was in the works, but of course there was no engagement or involvement in the political level in this decision, because we respect the independence of our judicial processes. Further to that, I have not had any direct or indirect conversations with any of my international counterparts on this.
So our hands are clean. We were just warned that this is coming. But, I mean, it's very interesting that he says, I think this tidbit that he added, a few days' notice. So it looks like whoever was after Mrs. Meng has been really, doing their homework. They knew that she had a change of planes in Canada and pounced on her. So very kind of interesting to see where this goes, because as you know very well, Huawei has been under a lot of pressure lately.
Criticism. Also.
And criticism.
Yeah.
The Wall Street Journal, for example, reported in April that the company has been under investigation for allegedly breaching U.S. sanctions on Iran by selling some kind of equipment to Iranian cell phone providers that contained American components that weren't supposed to be in Iran at all. The interesting thing was that yesterday at this, on Thursday, the Chinese Foreign Ministry added on this, that saying that China has abided by all UN sanctions against Iran, but it does not feel that it's obliged to follow unilateral U.S. sanctions. And so what they're saying is that, if you have UN sanctions, if the Security Council has agreed, we're fine, we'll follow them to the letter. But you cannot just impose sanctions unilaterally and expect us to follow them. We're not subject to the U.S. law. We'll see what happens.
Well, we also have, of course, an extradition treaty with the United States, which is why this occurred.
Yes,
Somebody was following, as you say, somebody was obviously following the travel plans and said, she's going to be in Canada. We have an extradition policy there with Canada, so
absolutely
act on our behalf, kind of thing. So.
Meanwhile, there's Mueller revelations in the background, and where does all of this play into the larger?
And the other thing is, Huawei has become one of the largest telecommunications companies in the world, and it's
second largest. Yeah,
it's really starting to breathe down the neck of its U.S. competitors. So, is this a way by the U.S. just asserting its dominance in the market by any means possible. We'll see.
All right. Well, we're going to have more about Huawei coming up in just a moment on the program. Well, Huawei has been in the news, as we just mentioned, but again, recently for an ongoing concern about potential spying or espionage and the development of 5G technology. Now, I don't know a lot about 5G technology, and I spoke to this expert who said it's the next generation that's coming. It's going to be exponentially faster and exponentially able to carry more data, and it's going to be important for all kinds of coming technology like autonomous cars where they need instantaneous reaction to things and instantaneous. And he also said, there's all kinds of equipment we can't even think of yet that's going to be developed because of 5G technology. One of the things they're concerned about, of course, is all the development of these new devices and softwares and how rapid the development is. And in rapid development, often some things in the software are overlooked and may allow for hacking. And the other thing that they're concerned about is, of course, Huawei's ability to put backdoors into their equipment, and undetectable backdoors as well. And Huawei has already been banned by the U.S. and by Australia. New Zealand has just refused a Huawei telecom contract, as has BT Telecom in Great Britain. Canada, of course, has lots of Huawei involvement in its telecom system. And the government has heard once again that this is a security concern. So I spoke to this expert, Daniel Bader, a tech analyst in Toronto, about this most recent concern right here in Canada.
So this is coming from a speech that the head of CSIS, David Vigneault, gave a few days ago about Huawei. The company has ties to the Communist Party back in China, where it is expected to share information that it gets, both legal and otherwise. And the U.S. and the U.K. and some other countries have accused Huawei of installing backdoor access for the Communist Party in China to access information that is coming over its networks. So Huawei is the second largest manufacturer of network equipment in the world. And the CSIS chief is encouraging the Liberal Party to ban Huawei because it is such a strong proponent of 5G.
How susceptible do you think that 5G is to backdoor technology and spying and so forth?
So I like to use the analogy that if one leaves a door open, nefarious actors are likely or more likely to walk through than if the door is closed. The concern is that because 5G is expected to proliferate at a rate that would dwarf 4G and is expected to provide internet connectivity to billions and even trillions of devices, sensors, Internet of Things, products that we haven't even dreamed of, the number of potential avenues for hacking will go up exponentially. And the concern there is that if the software inside those products, many of which are going to be cheaply made and without the necessary security measures to keep them from being hacked, there are going to be many more inroads for nefarious actors to hack into them.
Well, the Canadian government has said that it has protocols and so on in place, but the United States says that they have serious doubts about Canada's ability to do that. And any thoughts on that?
I think it's not specifically Canada's ability to do that. I think the U.S. is saying that no country's infrastructure is able to take on an actor like China right now when it comes to cyber espionage. That China is so far ahead of the rest of the world in putting backdoors into its products that are undetectable, that we should take a better safe than sorry approach and ban Huawei equipment altogether. The problem is that Huawei is entrenched in the Canadian telecommunications infrastructure, in a way that it never has been in the U.S. Huawei has been providing network equipment to companies like Bell and Telus going on 10 years now, and is already working with those carriers on 5G testing. At the same time, there are legitimate concerns that Huawei is working with the Chinese government, and as a result, could be doing things that would be deemed, unethical. So those concerns need to be heeded.
And that was an edited version of my conversation with Daniel Bader. He's a tech analyst in Toronto, and the full interview and the links are available in the highlights section. There's also been a fairly long concern about parts. You get complicated things like ships and jets and so on, military stuff, and some of these electronic components come from all over the place. And there's long been concern about possibly some of this equipment coming from China that may have some kind of backdoors in it.
Yeah, but to be fair to Huawei, they're saying that they're being asked to prove a negative. So basically, they're saying, tell us, that you're not spying on us when there's no evidence. Nobody has shown any evidence of this backdoors. We're saying they're undetectable, but there's no such thing as an undetectable backdoor.
And if doors exist, what's to say the other companies? This is so there has to be some global consensus about moving into this 5G world.
Well, I think everybody's moving towards it, but it's just the question that Chinese companies and individuals are required by law, Chinese law, to cooperate with the military and security services and provide them with any information that may be useful.
So is everybody else basically at this point in time?
Well, I don't know. If I discovered something, the government's not going to come along and say, you have to tell me,
Well, for example, Australia just passed a law requiring all the telecommunications providers to provide them a backdoor to their encryption. So, for example, yes, right. I think it happened Friday. So,
and the Supreme Court, but the journalist had to hand over the information.
Well, that's
a change in Canada. That's
caught waves.
Exactly, changed everything.
It's very interesting. A lot of these concerns that they raised about the 5G, it just doesn't apply only to Huawei. It applies to everyone because everybody is susceptible to cutting corners and getting cheap software without necessarily testing it. We do software updates on our phones every month or something
without thinking.
They just find something and. I don't think this is a problem just...
well, as you pointed out, nothing has been proven about Huawei at this point, or that we know about anyway.
And
that's been revealed publicly.
Yeah,
anyway.
And they're a private company. They're not a state-owned company. And a lot of people saying it would be a suicide for them to... given how much they've grown and how many countries use their equipment, it would be a suicide for them if they were to agree to this kind of backdoors for the Chinese intelligence. On the other hand, we know China is a communist country, one-party state, and who knows what kind of pressure they're able to exert on their companies and their executives.
Who's the first manufacturer of this equipment? Huawei second?
Well,
globally?
They're the second in terms of size and providing this equipment to the world. I don't know who's the first. It's probably an American company, I would guess. That's a complete guess. But, by the same token, if you have a company that might be doing this and has their equipment worldwide, wouldn't that be a great tool for a government that's seeking information, strategic and commercial secrets, for example, industrial secrets?
Well, this is truly the global village getting connected. So it's about the connections that the discussion has to center on.
But there's another thing here as well that you just mentioned, and you've mentioned as well, is the fact that the state is now saying you have to give us this information, whether it be a journalist or the telecom companies. Are we getting a little bit closer to Big Brother here?
Absolutely, especially with this Internet of Things. Well, listen, this is what he was saying. I mean, it's not going to be just like in the past, if you were worried about being, spied upon, you would, keep your cell phone away or something like that. Now, your coffee maker, your fridge, your stove, everything is probably
spying on you. Your coffee maker is telling your secrets.
So
Absolutely.
I can't wait till they talk back.
Well,
close the fridge door.
Exactly, but talk back. It means that they're constantly listening to you.
Nothing surprises me.
All right. Well, if you have any thoughts on this, drop us a line and tell us what you think about all this. Coming up, a sad event in a way, but a wonderful speech by a former Canadian Prime Minister as he eulogizes George H.W. Bush. Well, Carmel, this is your story, and you were paying attention to the funeral of American former President George H.W. Bush this week, a eulogy from one of our own former prime ministers.
That's right. That's right. Mark Brian Mulroney was one of 4 people, including the president's son, former President George W. Bush, to speak during the service. It was held at the Episcopal National Cathedral in Washington, and Brian Mulroney spoke of their time together as leaders of their respective countries and the long friendship that continued after. He reminded us that George Herbert Walker was a one-term president, which I had totally forgotten, and that it was during his time in office that the original North American Free Trade Agreement was signed, which seems like a very distant memory to many of us, especially after this summer with all of the tension in Canada about the signing of the new North American Free Trade Agreement that has a variety of names at this point. And of course, the first war in Iraq, controversial as we remember it, but Desert Storm had support from the United Nations with a coalition of 29 countries involved. Brian Mulroney was Canada's Prime Minister from September 1984 to June 1993. Here's a segment now of what he told the family, friends, and dignitaries attending the funeral.
Do you remember where you were? The summer you left your teenage years behind and turned 20. Well, I was working as a laborer in my hometown in northern Quebec, trying to make enough money to get back into law school. It was a tough job, but I was safe and secure, and had the added benefit of my mother's home cooking every night. On September 2nd, 1944, as we have just heard so eloquently from John, 20-year-old Lieutenant George Bush was preparing to attack Japanese war installations in the Pacific. He was part of a courageous generation of young Americans who led the charge against overwhelming odds in the historic and bloody battle for supremacy in the Pacific against the colossal military might of Imperial Japan. That's what George Bush did the summer he turned 20. Many men of differing talents and skills have served as president, and many more will do so as the decades unfold, bringing new strength and glory to these United States of America. And 50 or 100 years from now, as historians review the accomplishments and the context of all who have served as president, I believe it will be said that in the life of this country, the United States, which is, in my judgment, the greatest democratic republic that God has ever placed on the face of this earth, I believe it will be said that no occupant of the Oval Office was more courageous, more principled, and more honorable than George Herbert Walker Bush. George Bush was a man of high accomplishment, but he also had a delightful sense of humor and was a lot of fun. At his first NATO meeting in Brussels as the new American president, He sat opposite me, actually, that day. George was taking copious notes as the heads of government spoke. We were all limited in time. But you know, it's very flattering to have the President of the United States take notes as you speak. And even someone as modest as me threw in a few more adjectives here and there to extend the pleasure of the experience. After President Mitterrand, Prime Minister Thatcher, and Chancellor Kohl had spoken, it was the turn of the Prime Minister of Iceland, who, as President Bush continued to write, went on and on and on and on, ending only when the Secretary General of NATO firmly decreed a coffee break. George put down his pen, walked over to me and said, "Brian, I've just learned the fundamental principle of international affairs." I said, "What's that, George?" He said, "The smaller the country, the longer the speech."
Amazing acoustics in that cathedral, aren't there? Well, Brian Mulroney went on to say that when the wall came down in Berlin, an amazing time in relatively recent history for all of us who were alive to witness it, George Bush, that first George Bush president, would not attend the festivities because he did not want to be perceived as boasting.
I had a piece of the wall once upon a time.
We have a piece of the wall here in Montreal. Have you seen it?
No.
It's down at the International Center. What's it called?
The World Trade Center.
Well, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful concourse, too. Have you seen it?
Yeah.
It's quite something, isn't it? It's
Yeah,
really,
it's
and it's a
very-
big chunk.
Well, my chunk was a... And
You lived in Germany for a while.
I was in, I believe I was in Vienna at the time the wall came down.
My father was in Berlin when he was a Soviet officer when they were building the wall. The day they built the wall, it literally took them maybe several days, but the major part of it was built in one day.
Well, they put up barbed wire first and then concrete blocks and then built it up from there.
What was so amazing was how fast it came down.
Yeah.
You know, how fast all of that happened in that, what was it, the Velvet Revolution? There was so many names for that. When 1989?
Yes.
Yeah, I'll never forget that autumn. Anyway, an era has ended.
Speaking of walls and borders and things, how's that for a segue? Marie-Claude, you've got
Fabulous.
To
Yes,
She's going to tell us about a link. Excuse me, I just...
Well, it's a report by Reuters that caught my attention last week, and it's about a library that's in Quebec and also in Vermont. It's in Stansted, and it's every once in a while it's in the news. Let me show you. Wait a minute, I have the wrong one here. So this is the building itself.
That's the library.
That's the library. Yes. In 2016, Barack Obama said it was the symbol of the friendship between Canada and the United States, but to Justin Trudeau when he welcomed him in Washington. We've also heard stories about firearms smuggling in that library, but most of the stories are more human and more positive. Now, a Reuters angle was the travel ban established by Trump in 2017, preventing Iranian and people from countries, Muslim countries, like 13 Muslim countries, that can't come to the United States anymore. So let's say the person that they interviewed is a student from Iran. She has a one entry visa, so she can stay as long as she wants in the States, but she can't get out to see her family. So the family flew to Canada, and they met in the library. So here are some pictures. So, well, this is another family. So,
yeah, but look, see that
straddles the
line on the
border.
floor?
Yeah.
That black line on the floor?
Yeah.
The family is in Canada and...
Yeah, the guy, that's another person, another story, but it's the same principle. So the person on the left is a student in the States, and the family comes, yeah.
I wonder if they can hug.
Yeah, it's very...
Oh, no, you can cross back and forth within the library.
Within the library.
This is the map, you know, where it's in Stansted in the Eastern Townships.
So
and
the entrance is in Canada, but
No,
most
the-
of the building is in
actually,
the
the
States?
entrance is in the States, but you can park in the back in Canada, and you're allowed to go around in front. But the book area is in the States.
Okay.
Yeah. And I had, well, we don't really have time, but I have a very touching clip of the student saying how she was happy just to smell her dad, and because there's
Wow.
nothing, even if you can Skype, talk on the phone,
Yes,
there's nothing
not
like
the same,
actually
yeah, the
touching.
physical presence.
Yeah, that technology can never give that to you.
Well, on that happy
So-
note, we're going to have to cut it at this point. And interesting, that's the Haskell Library in Stansted, which is on the border. So for Carmel and Levon and Marie-Claude and Chantal and Pierre, I'm Mark Montgomery. Take care until next time. Bye-bye.
And don't forget to download our app.
That's right.
Yes, it's here.